Goodness, your reflexes are... Welcome! This is Frane welcoming you to my video discussing Omega Translation House's strange localization of Sora, as well as a brief history covering the localization of the Orange Juice games prior to Fruit Bat Factory's acquisition. While the initial translation of Sora is infamous amongst fans of the franchise, most fans of Orange Juice joined after the Steam release of 100% Orange Juice in 2014. And while many of us today treat it as a joke translation that was created by a troll who wanted to anger everyone in the Orange Juice fandom, there's more to the story than just that. So, without further delay, let's get into the story about how this translation came to be. The story begins with Orange Juice's first English publisher, Rockin Android. If the name sounds familiar, they're the ones who translated Saguri, Acceleration of Saguri, and the original release of Flying Red Barrel. The Orange Juice games weren't the only games Rockin Android localized. They've translated classic Zochensoft games such as Gundam Monium and Bunny Must Die. The Saguri series was one of their most popular games, even getting a bundle collector's release called Saguri Perfect Edition. Then sometime after 2009, a falling out between Rockin Android and Orange Juice happened, causing Rockin Android to lose their rights to releasing future installments in the franchise. With the success of the Saguri franchise overseas, Orange Juice sought to find another publisher to localize their games. The rights were given to Omega Translation House, also called Omega TH, and on July 31st, 2012, the original English translation of Sora was released on Gamersgate. While the quality of most English translations is something that's subjective, there are very few translations that are universally considered bad. The initial translation for Sora is one of them. Comparing it to the translation by Fruit Bat Factory, the dialogue is surprisingly similar. In fact, the Omega translation's dialogue conveys the overall narrative fairly well. The average player will get that as a story about Sora, a girl who defected from one army to restore peace onto the world. It's not some kind of joke translation that changes the story entirely. With that said, the Omega translation did change a lot about the game. Most infamously, the characters are referred to as Reploids instead of altered humans. Reploid isn't even a real word. It's a term used in the Mega Man X series used to describe sapient robots. These characters are not robots. They're normal humans modified to handle weapons of mass destruction, hence the name Altered Human. And this terminology isn't just a one-time thing either. It's present throughout the entire game. Another huge change that the Omega translation made was the names of 3 of the characters. And no, they didn't just change the English wording of these characters, they gave them different names entirely. Nas is called Nadius, Sham is called Siri, after the Apple virtual assistant, and C is called Telos. By the way, Sora refers to Telos using male pronouns because of, I don't know, the short hair, androgynous physique. I originally thought it was because Omega was using Google Translate since the program changes all instances of gender-neutral words to male, but the sentence that refers to Telos as he doesn't have that. Despite only having to translate the game, Omega somehow managed to implement a glitch in the game. The dialogue prior to Mira's fight has 2 branching paths, one where the player avoids Mira's Saw Blade attack, and one where the player gets hit by the Saw Blade. Avoiding the Saw Blade gives you Mira's normal dialogue, but getting hit gives you the dialogue shown at the beginning of this video. They forgot to playtest the other branch to make sure it was working before releasing this to the public. Speaking of Mira, probably the biggest change they made in the script, dialogue-wise, was omitting Mira's backstory of how they had a female mind and a male body. Instead, what we got was more ranting about the morality of the war, something that we already knew from Alte's earlier conversation with Sora. Now then, let's talk about the first thing everybody first notices about the dialogue, the font. At first I thought the word spacing was just Omega using the same font as the original, just with the English typeface. But no, if that's the case, the dialogue will look like this, no spacing. Not to mention everywhere else in the game, the font has correct spacing, so it must have been done intentionally. My best guess is that Omega envisions the cat speaking in a robotic voice, cause they're not just robots in this case, they're Reploids. Even though nowhere in the Mega Man X games do they space out the dialogue in this manner. Going back to what I said before about comparing this to Fruit Bat Factory's translation, while most of the dialogue conveys the story well, its writing doesn't convey the characters well. The characters talk so unnaturally as if they were going by a raw script. The way translation works in dialogue is that they first convert what the characters say to the language that they want. The dialogue is going to look rough at first, but that's when the revisioning process comes in and converts the raw dialogue into something that matches the character's personality. And yet, it feels like this translation skipped the revisioning process. Actually, they gave revision to some of the dialogue, and it's random pop culture references. Even worse, remember how I said a lot of dialogue between the two translations were similar? Putting the two side by side, and you'll know exactly which lines are faithful to the source material, and which ones are Omega taking creative liberties by ruining the tone of the conversation.
So, that was the Lost Angelic Chronicles of Frane, Dragon's Odyssey. I hope to see more games on PC from EXE Create, and I also hope that Omegath, the ones who published this English version, can do a good job on other games. They recently translated Sora, but no one told me whether that was a faithful translation or not. Still, I can't find anything out about Omegath on the internet at all. They don't have a website, they don't have any kind of contact information. So mysterious.
So now that we know how bad their translation of Sora is, that brings up the big question many Orange Juice fans ask. How did Omega TH get the rights in the first place? Sora was probably the most anticipated game in the entire Orange Juice franchise. It was teased in both Acceleration of Saguri and 100% Orange Juice. You can't just give the task of localizing the most story-driven game in the series to some upstart. This group must have at least some experience with translating games. And while to me it looks like Omega is just some person who crawled out of hell to provide a lousy translation of Sora, there actually is a game they localized prior to Sora. It's called The Lost Angelic Chronicles of Frane, Dragon's Odyssey. Frane is an RPG I hear very polarizing thoughts on, but that's what the gameplay itself. How's the translation? Well, it's actually pretty good for what I've seen. I actually had a hard time believing Omega Translation House worked on this until I saw their name in the credits. This isn't even a small game either. It's an RPG that takes around 8 or so hours to beat. The difference between this game's translation and Sora's translation is as clear as night and day. So the question is, why was Sora's translation so amateurish in quality despite the more dialogue-heavy Frane appearing more professional? And the answer to that is Omega had much more of a passion for JRPG games than shoot-'em-up games. I'm not going to go into the story regarding Omega's former accounts, but I can say that all the games they talked about were JRPGs like the Trail series. Despite the vulgar language used, I can at least tell they're passionate about these type of games. But despite their specialization in localizing role-playing games, Omega Translation House established itself as a translation and publisher for all games. So when Orange Juice came to them asking them to translate a shoot-'em-up game, they didn't take it seriously. After all, it's a shoot-'em-up game, who plays it for the story? Combine that with the ego Omega gained after accomplishing their translation of Frane, and you get a translation that was essentially a playground for Omega to toy with. One of the more interesting aspects about this translator is, as I said before, his ego. Even regarding Frane, there's another translation team creating a fan translation of the game. Omega issued a cease and desist on their project despite the game itself being freeware. While Frane mostly avoided criticism since it was a decent English translation of a Doshin Soft RPG game, Sora's unprofessional release spawned a massive wave of backlash regarding its localization. Even the now removed 2012 trailer for Sora had common chains of complaints from fans of Saguri, complaining about the game's more infamous flaws. It got so bad that a petition was created for Orange Juice to give the localization rights to a better translator. This negative feedback upset Omega, so in retaliation, he copyright claimed every playthrough of his translation of Sora, as well as creating a very transparent sock puppet account to argue with those complaining in the trailer's comment section. Needless to say, Omega's efforts convinced nobody that the translation was anything but poor. Even Orange Juice took note and looked for another translation group for their future titles. This is where Fruit Bat Factory was given the rights to publish their upcoming games, and within a few years, Omega Translation House was delisted as a publisher from Gamersgate, with their only 2 games to their name being Frane and Sora. Sora was re-released on Steam by Fruit Bat Factory in 2016, and Frane was re-released on multiple platforms by Kemco in 2019. So now that we know Omega was a real publisher and not some kind of troll bent on ruining the franchise, it makes me wonder what would have happened if they actually did put the same amount of effort in translating Sora as they did with Frane. Would Orange Juice still rely on Omega to publish the other installments of the franchise? And more importantly, with the last Orange Juice game being Xmas Shooting Scramble in 2015, would the franchise end with that installment? 100% Orange Juice's success on Steam was arguably the catalyst for the franchise straying away from creating individual installments. And even without OJ's success, it's very apparent that the Circle is losing their passion for creating individual games as shown with the development of Elysian Roan. It's always fun to think about a future where Omega actually cared about giving a faithful translation to Sora, but it's probably for the best they acted this way, because if they didn't, Fruit Bat Factory wouldn't have the rights to Orange Juice, and the franchise probably wouldn't be anything like it is today. Dunno. I'm not sure if I can handle being a part of the Omega TH Discord server now, won't I? This is Frane, and I'll see you guys then.